Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Glad to see you here today. We'll get started in a few minutes. Just let everyone get logged in this morning. So happy to see everyone here today. Good morning. I'll just give it a few more seconds to let everyone get logged in before I get started. So good to see all of you here today. Give it a few more seconds. Good to see everyone. Barbara, Julia, Debbie, Diane, Beth, Mike, Linda.
Gotta say, I was at the Slavery in the North conference by the Slave Dwelling Project.
Was it?
Wow.
Yeah. Yes. We actually made a presentation along with Scarlett Hoyt from.
Oh, I saw that.
Yes, and Roshana Gray and Roshana Gray, not Roshana from Harvard, and so yes, and we saw a part. Sorry, we weren't there to be able to be there in person, but there's Roshana right there. Okay.
Hi, Christian. Hi, Julia. So good to see everyone here this morning. I'll go ahead and get started so I can be respectful for everyone's time. Good morning, everyone. My name is Egypt Lloyd, and I am the co-founder along with my father, Dennis Lloyd, and other Lloyd family members who founded the Slave Legacy History Coalition in 2020. This is our fourth year and our second meeting for the fall session, and it's so good to see all of you here today. We have a wonderful, wonderful meeting today that I'm so excited for Kalimah Knight to present. She has honored us today by sharing her time and her knowledge with all of us today. So I'm so excited to introduce her here shortly. But before I get started, I will turn it over briefly to our lead coordinator, Naomi Gordon, who will give our announcements today. So Naomi, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. As I do announcements, Alex will be dropping in the chat some links, as some of the events I'll be talking about do require registration. So to begin, tomorrow evening, the Museum of African American History will be hosting their annual Stone Book Award. This year, they'll be honoring authors Victor Luckerson, Barbara D. Savage, and Chad L. Williams. And there will be a reception and gathering in the historic African Meeting House. Again, that'll be tomorrow evening. And then next Thursday, History Cambridge, in partnership with Cambridge Black History Project and the Cambridge Public Library, present a lecture titled Beyond Her Time, The Visionary Works of Pauline Hopkins, which explores the life and legacy of Hopkins, who was a novelist, journalist, playwright, and activist who fearlessly tackled issues of race, gender, and social justice. And that'll be at the main branch of the Cambridge Public Library. Then on Saturday, October 9th, the play A Revolutionary Encounter in London will be presented at Christ Church, Cambridge. The play is about the little-known meeting between two of Boston's most historic colonial icons, Phyllis Wheatley and Benjamin Franklin. And then Saturday, October 27th, Hidden Brookline and Barbara Brown is running their walking tour on Brookline's hidden history of slavery and freedom. The lively 90-minute tour visits 3 sites to tell the history and stories of slavery and freedom, and will begin at Brookline Town Hall. And then finally, on Thursday, November 7th, a partnership of Historic Bostons will be presenting Undergrounds Before Rail, Escaping Slavery, Claiming Freedom, Claiming Liberty. And that will be with award-winning historian Margaret Newell, who will tell the stories of Native and Black people escaping slavery and the people who helped them And that will be in conversation with our very own Egypt Lloyd. And that will be at the Boston Public Library. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Egypt.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you for that. Great job. And also to thank you, Alex, for that, dropping that information in the chat for everyone today. Before I get started in to announce our wonderful speaker today and presenter, Dad, did you have something that you would like to say to everyone in the meeting today?
Yes, I just wanted to acknowledge a recent grant that we received from Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery Initiative for $75,000, which will help us continue the work that we're doing as we expand and introduce a new program called Community Engagement and Listening Program, which will be introduced to a number of churches. The platform where we introduce this will be local churches within the Boston and Cambridge area. And the discussions will be held there, and where we will explore the legacy and history of slavery, and also listen to people, individuals who may have had a connection to the historical past as it relates to enslavement of family members. This will be done in conjunction with Reverend Dan Smith, the former senior pastor at First Cambridge, First Church in Cambridge, excuse me, and also with an advisory board that we have put together to assist us, which includes today's speaker, Kalimah Redd Knight, Marika Van Dam for History Cambridge, Paula Parrish from the Cambridge Black History Project, Melissa Bartholomew from Harvard Divinity School, Liz Walker, former WBZ TV commentator and reporter, Christian Welks from the Museum of African American History, and I believe that's it. Yes, and so we have a number of fine people who will be working as advisors to us as we introduce this program. But I did want to just announce that because it gives us an opportunity, the Slave Legacy History, to expand its reach in terms of programmatic activity within the Boston and Cambridge community. So thank you very much to Harvard and the Legacy of Slavery Initiative for that grant. Before I turn it over to Egypt, I did have to make offer a few comments just about our today's speaker, because it's great. I work with my daughters in this project, and it's wonderful. And but it's also great to have the daughter of a very good friends of mine who I actually grew up with. Kalimah's dad and her mother were very good friends of mine, and I remember when Kalimah was much younger, put it that way. And so today it's really an honor and excited. I'm excited to hear Kalimah's presentation and to have her on our program today. So having said that, as I turn over everything to my daughter, who will introduce the daughter of a very good friend of mine. And Egypt, back to you.
Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Dad. And if everyone did not have the chance to read Kalimah's bio, I will just say a few brief things about her bio, but I do encourage everyone to read it in its entirety. She has a very extensive background. But today, as we said, we have honored guest, Kalimah Knight, who is here to present for us today, and we thank you for her time. And for everyone that does not know, Kalimah Knight currently serves as a Senior Deputy Director of Media Relations of Tufts University. She also supports the mitigation of issues and crisis communications management at the university. And in 2021, she received the Tufts Distinction Award, which recognizes outstanding faculty and staff accomplishments across the university that exemplifies leadership and innovation with integrity and a collaborative spirit. Prior to Tufts, Kalimah was a public relations manager at Simmons University and a news reporter for the Boston Globe. She is also currently engaged in the more than $5 million renovation of its historic headquarters at 558 Massachusetts Avenue. Kalimah earned a BA in print journalism from Hampton University, a master's in communications management from Simmons, and she is married to her college sweetheart, Chris, and they have a lovely child, Elias. So with all that, Kalimah, welcome to the Slave Legacy History Coalition. We are honored to have you here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I feel so at home. So let me go ahead and start the presentation. So I'm going to get into a little screen sharing fun. Just bear with me. Okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, looks good.
Great. So thank you so much for the very warm and generous introduction. As I said, I feel so comfortable and so at home amongst you all. So my name's Kalimah Knight again. I'm the president of the board of the League of Women for Community Service. We are one of the oldest continuing Black women's service organizations in the country. And again, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be a part of this wider conversation about our history, this whole act of opening our minds and hearts to this very complicated American story that we all share. And I'm very optimistic that talking about the specific history of the League will help expand your own knowledge base. So today I'm just going to cover some of the early roots of the League. We'll kind of slingshot into history, slingshot in time, I should say, into our more recent activities. We'll do a quick overview of the building and dive into our archive and talk about some of the women affiliated with the organization. And we'll also talk a little bit about where we're headed. And my hope is that we'll have enough time for a Q&A. So a quick bit about me again. So I've been president of the League for a little over 2 years, and I was first introduced to the organization in 2004 by my great aunt Shirley, who had been affiliated with the organization for many years. Many people who grew up in Roxbury, particularly Lower Roxbury in the South End, have some connection to the League. I grew up in Roxbury on the Dorchester line, but I never knew about the League when I was growing up. So really, I come to this work as a member of the community. I'm not an academic. I'm also not a historian. I started my career, as Egypt mentioned, as a journalist, and I transitioned to public and media relations and higher education. So my interest really stems from my passion for stories and also my love of Black culture and history. My father researched our family roots, like many people in his generation, inspired by Alex Haley's book Roots. And so we got a chance to understand sort of the origins of our own family story. And as Egypt said, I'm also a graduate of an HBCU. So, you know, when I introduce myself, I have to say, and talk about the League, the number one question I get is, I've never heard of the League. What are you talking about? So I have to say that's actually a very common response. And what I know now is really what the League is. It's really a bridge to history. And it's a bridge specifically because it still exists. The League is a bridge to the abolition movement. Here in Boston that was very vibrant and active in the country. But the League is also a bridge to the suffrage movement and the fight for equality. It's the constellation of these two huge movements all in one site, which we think is very, very special. So really, to understand the history of the League, we have to go back a little bit. So let's dive in. Okay, so as many of you know, Boston was a hotbed for the abolition movement in the mid to late 19th century. It really was a multiracial coalition of people that was centered by a small but hugely impactful Black community. And at the center of that Black community were Black women. So this is a image of Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin. She was born in 1842 in Beacon Hill, and she was a prolific abolitionist. She and her husband, George Ruffin, helped to recruit soldiers for the 54th and the 55th All-Black Massachusetts Regiment, and this was a group that really changed the tide for the Union Army in the Civil War. So George was also a very famous individual. He was the first African-American to graduate from Harvard Law School and the first Black municipal judge in the United States. But Josephine was also a very singular individual. She was very involved in the suffrage movement. She was very good friends with other women who were involved in that space, including, Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe. All of these women were very active in trying to, fight for equality for women. All of them were also club women. However, Josephine advocated for suffrage within the Black community. And she had a phrase, all rights for all. And I always like to say she understood intersectionality before it became a thing. So she was very much part of the Black women's club movement, which was very prominent in the late 19th century, and primarily at that time composed of very well-to-do Black women who were focused on uplifting the race and also focused on providing charity throughout their community. So when Josephine's husband passed away, she devoted all of her time into really uplifting this space. She co-founded a Black women's club called the Women's Era. And this was also a very heavily influential national group. This group of women published the Women's Era newspaper, which was the first newspaper by and for Black women. And really, they were very inspired by the work of Ida B. Wells, who at that time had made quite a name for herself going into the South and documenting a lot of the atrocities that were happening in that area. So the Women's Era was really echoing a lot of this advocacy work, but also talking about women's issues. So Josephine was one of the people that was heavily involved with organizing a national conference for colored women in Boston in 1895, a really a mover and a shaker of her time. And she was, by all sort of intents, for all purpose, was a leader of a group, a generation of women who sort of had come up post Civil War. So during this Reconstruction era, this generation of women that were really trying to take advantage of some of the opportunity that had been made available to African Americans at that time. So, but as we go into the turn of the next century, in the 20th century, a lot of the rights that had been earned by African Americans started to be pulled back. You started to see the rise of violence in the South. You started to see Jim Crow laws take place across the country. The Birth of a Nation film had really sort of gotten into these horribly negative depictions of Black people, particularly Black men, and this really lent itself to the rise of violence and lynchings that was happening in the country. So there was a lot of turmoil as this the country was really trying to understand what it meant to be a multiracial democracy. But meanwhile, this generation of women were still working and still pushing the vote for women and also advancing rights for African Americans. So the group of women who had formed the Women's Era, which had dissolved in the late 19th century, came together again in 1918, and they organized something called the Soldiers' Comfort Unit. And this group really helped to support Black servicemen who were stationed in the Boston area after World War I. The women really helped them to receive transitional services. And at the time, the Army was segregated, so the women really stepped up to help out these young men. So after the war, they saw a wider need to serve the Black community. So in 1919, they established the League of Women for Community Service, which was incorporated the following year in 1920. And in that same year, the women independently purchased a house at 558 Mass Avenue, and there's an image of the building during that era on the left. So this is the first president of the League of Women for Community Service. Her name is Mariah Baldwin, and she is a very, very famous daughter of Cambridge. She really was a remarkable woman. She was the first African-American, not just woman, but first African-American appointed headmaster of sort of a mainstream public school in the Northeast in 1889. And 2 years prior to that, she had been, hired as a teacher, but not before there were huge protests by the Black community to make sure she was hired, because initially she was turned down. But they eventually sort of succumbed to the pressure, hired her, and she was so talented, she was promoted to serve as the principal of the school, the Agassiz School in Cambridge. And if you can imagine what a remarkable thing it was for this woman to head a school in Cambridge. Her entire staff was white, and 98% of her students were white. And I can't imagine another Black woman given this level of authority in the country, but she was given this role, and she was incredibly revered. In fact, most of the faculty at Harvard had their kids in this school and were trying to find ways to access the school. She did so many things. She brought in a school nurse into the building, one of the first people to do that. She actually developed a parent-teacher group. She really believed in wellness and sort of a holistic approach to education, and she was highly respected. In fact, she was affiliated with the school for 40 years, which was eventually named after her in 2002. So during her time as headmaster, she was highly respected and very revered. At the same time, she also was an incredible debater, and she had a huge passion for literature. But she really cultivated, a Black intellectual community in Cambridge at the time, and she created safe spaces in her home. She often had literature groups come into her home for study. She opened her home to W.E.B. Du Bois and William Monroe Trotter when they were students at Harvard. Many of those study spaces were not welcoming, and she made sure that they had a space. And I always like to say she was their tutor and was considered an incredible leader and an incredible intellectual mind during that time. So with so much happening in the country, the League sort of became this incredible hub of activity, really a nexus for education and culture in the area. They sponsored lectures and exhibits and hosted dignitaries who were coming in from, outside of the state. They organized, community meetings, allowed other organizations to come in and have their meetings. The South End actually has one of the largest Pullman Porter populations, and a lot their meetings were held at the League, and including the United Order of Tents, Black fraternities and sororities. They administered a lot of their charitable work from the building. They also became a repository of archival material. They built a full library. There were a lot of libraries in that area that were still segregated, but they developed their own library space. But they also housed Black women who were coming into the city from the South to kind of get themselves settled in this new space, but also who were going to college. And one of the women who stayed at the League during her time in Boston was Coretta Scott King. Often there was sort of a de facto segregation that was set up in the dorm rooms, and they just could not access housing. And so the League provided a safe space for them to live during their time in college in Boston. And I think overall the space was just a place of joy and gathering and reverence. We have stories of people meeting their spouses. It was really a place of great pride and achievement for the community. So, but over the years, the League sort of has gone through a number of transitions and not sort of existed at full capacity. Over the years, I think there was a sense that there was less interest in participating in a women's club. It seemed less appealing. There was a lot of activism, and I think the feeling was that it was not quite as progressive. There were also a lot of demographic changes in the South End, which in many recent years has become much more gentrified. And the business model sort of changed quite a bit. People were less inclined to have their events at the League, and the organization, and I think the building has sort of gone through a lot of transition, and especially particularly in recent years. However, in recent time, we're really excited to share that we've sort of been in a stage where we've really been embracing the legacy of the organization and staging what we like to call a renaissance. Our main goals are to restore our historic headquarters as a resource to the community, along with a space that we also own at 18 Holyoke, which was still, until very recently, still housing women coming to college in need of housing. We also want to work to preserve and make more public our historic collection. And we're also working to expand community engagement around education and cultural opportunities. The main way we're going to be able to do that is really to expand our capacity around operating an infrastructure with the goal of securing long-term sustainability and independence. And really our goal is preservation, retention of ownership, and expanding public access. So we've been very busy, and so far we've raised more than $1.9 million of a more than $5 million restoration project to restore our headquarters. We got our last and most biggest grant from the city of Boston, more than $700,000, which we will apply to the capital campaign to restore the building. We've been able to put together a number of other grants to help, support the rebuilding of the space. We've also engaged in a lot of more visible activities. We give out a scholarship every year. Last year, we gave it out to 2 students who were coincidentally on their way to Howard University, another HBCU. Last year, we collaborated with Suffolk University, and they've done some work to help us analyze our public mission and our online presence, and done some evaluation of effectiveness and opportunities for improvement. We've had 2 really great programs recently, one with the Boston Athenaeum, where we partnered with them on this incredible exhibit by Harriet Hayden, who was an incredible abolitionist and documentarian. It was a wonderful exhibit, and we got a chance to participate. We also work with Harvard Radcliffe Institute's Schlesinger Library. They had an archival exhibit that highlighted the work of the legacies of Black women whose papers they hold at the library. Schlesinger actually holds a small number of papers from the League, which constitutes their first Black women's collection. We've also been much more visible. We're doing sort of forums like this just to kind of get ourselves out there, to educate people about the League and our history. We've been in Historic New England a few times. We were also in WBUR Story about 1.5 years ago. We've established a social media presence, and we run a pretty robust campaign during Black History Month and Women's History Month. So if you could, we would love if you could follow us. We're gaining a lot of support and engagement, and we really encourage you to keep in touch through social media and let us know and continue to follow us. Okay. So community initiatives, we are out in the community quite often. We do a regular Thanksgiving food basket with the Sportsman's Tennis Club in Dorchester. We also participate in the Chester Square Neighborhood Association Festival every year. It's a really great event. And we this year we just had it about 2 weeks ago, and we got a chance to talk again about the league and engage with folks from the community. Fundraising, this is a big one. So with regard to fundraising, we have quite a bit of work to do, but we've been really fortunate to collaborate with a bunch of organizations to help us raise money. We worked with an all-female run group in Boston called the Trailblaze Hers. They had an annual run, and we were able to partner with them, and they're able to help raise funds for us. We also had a great collaboration with the New England Conservatory of Music. They did a dynamic program honoring the 70th anniversary graduation of Coretta Scott King. So we, again, talked about the history of the league. They were kind enough to also support our fundraising. We also supported 2 women who ran the Boston Marathon. I was privileged enough to be able to be one of those women to run in support of fundraising for the league. So organizational investments. I like to think of the league some ways as sort of a kind of a mom and pop nonprofit, and we are in the process of really sort of modernizing ourselves so that we can be more independent. So this year we worked with a management consulting firm to help really revitalize our vision and to really look at it through the lens of our original mission so that we can keep the integrity there. We also worked to build a roadmap to explore our current governance protocols and procedures while really expanding our internal infrastructure. And again, to really establish a path forward for sustainable growth. We also worked with another consultant who helped us sort of start the process of reconstituting our finances and accounting. And this means updating our books, financial records, getting ready for audit preparation, all of these very important things that nonprofits need to be on top of that we are in a lot of ways catching up to, but we've been doing a lot of the work and just preparing the organization to, really function in a way that gives people the confidence to support us and make sure that there's a lot of transparency with everything around our finances. So in terms of the board, we added another board member. We're hoping to add more. But of all these things, one of the aspects that has been most compelling is that we were able to reestablish our independence as a nonprofit. We established our 501c3 status, and this is a really, really important step for any nonprofit. And so we're really pleased to get that organized and in support of the organization as we really start to really go out for more fundraising. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the building, because the league is a very dynamic place. We have this organization with this rich history, but we also have this really wonderful space. So this is a photo of the league sort of in its current state, even though there's been quite a few updates during our restoration. And the photo on the left is an original image of what the league looked like. So the building was originally built in 1857. It was the home of a gentleman named William R. Carnes, and he was a wealthy importer of fine woods. And he really used the space as a showpiece for his business. And he really blinged it out and made it sort of a way to market his business. He actually went bankrupt in 1868 after the Civil War. A lot of businesses went bankrupt after the war, and he sold it to a gentleman named Nathaniel Farwell, and it's sort of known still as the Farwell Mansion. So the building really has very significant architecture. It is one of the very few buildings in the South End that hasn't had any major restorations or alterations. It's almost completely intact as it was in 1857, which was a very rare thing for the South End. And we also know that it may be one of the few buildings that hasn't been chopped up in Boston, hasn't been sort of divided into apartment buildings. But it really is a very rare example of amazing Victorian architecture in the city. And you can see the building has a bow front Victorian Gothic brick row house feel, and it is right at the southeast corner of Chester Square. If you're familiar with Mass Ave, there's two sort of service lanes with huge, large fountains, and it's right in that little service lane area. So this is the interior of the building. As I said, it's remarkably intact. It consists of very high ceilings, large rooms. There's very elaborate woodwork. All of it is mahogany and imported from overseas, from South America. There's carved marble fireplaces, gilt frame mirrors imported from Paris. A very, very dramatic stairway that leads to the second floor with very beautiful Corinthian columns that have walls that are covered with mirrors, and top with a skylight with an ornamental painted glass highlight beneath. So the gilded bronze chandeliers, original kitchen apparatus that's located in the basement. It's got servant bell hook pulls, doors and woodwork of rare tropical wood and veneers, mercury glass doorknobs, and much of the furniture is original to the house, and quite a bit of it is still there. Okay, so like all houses in the Chester Square, it has 4 stories with a basement and also a 5th level billiard room with about 180-degree view of the Boston skyline. And these are just some more details around the rooms and the chandeliers and the marble fireplaces. This is the newel post as a personal touch. It's said to be the owner's dog. All handcraft. It's incredible to think of the craftsmanship that went on in that era, that somebody actually created this by hand. There's a shot of the gilded mirrors, which were said to sell for $10,000. You can imagine inflation in 1857. And there's 2 of those huge mirrors still in the building. And that's an example of the one of the fireplaces. They're all imported soft marble from Italy. And I don't know if you can see, but the 3 figures in the marble are said to be the owner's children. And there's the dog again. So the collection. So I think the house is spectacular and, always sort of has been considered the main attraction. But I think in recent years, the discovery of the collection has emerged as a really star player, because it really tells the story of the activities that were happening in the building, but also tells the stories of a lot of the other organizations that had, activities and events in the space. It also adds this very fascinating component where the collection really gives the perspective of the women who founded the League. So it's their view on history, which is really, really fascinating concept to me, because you get to see how they thought, what they were doing, and what kind of things that they valued, and it's all encapsulated in this sort of body of items. And so those include letters, ephemera, photos, ledgers, meeting minutes that are not only from the League, but other organizations. As I said, we have minutes and financial records from Pullman Porters, United Order of Tents. A lot of masonry groups met at the League. So all of those records are part of the collection. We have magazines, we have busts, we have furniture, paintings, and we have about 500 rare books and journals. And, I think the story of the collection is a really fascinating one, and I think a testament to ownership, because the women own the building. And even when times were, more challenging, because they own the building, the collection was not touched. And so it stayed there for years until essentially one of our board members started the process of really clearing it out. And this was really sort of over the pandemic. She would go every weekend and spend 2 or 3 hours with a small team and just start to separate things that needed to be thrown away and things that were valuable, until we were able to cull down to some items that we were really able to see and find of tremendous historical value. So this is one of the marquee items from the collection. It's called a Personal War Sketches. And it is not uncommon to have these type of commemorative books. Essentially, they are sort of a record that will be created from a veteran's post. So if there's a war, this book will, someone will take the book, interview the men that were in a conflict and write it down. But what makes this rare is that this essentially includes the stories of soldiers from the 54th and the 5th All-Black Regiments. And it was organized and gathered by Pauline Hopkins, who I heard you all mention earlier in your introduction. I mean, Pauline Hopkins is from Portland, Maine, but was also very much a daughter of Cambridge. And she was remarkable, a novelist, a journalist, playwright, historian, and editor. But what Pauline Hopkins did was she went to this veterinary post, which was called the Robert Bell 134 veterinary post. And she interviewed these young men about their experiences in the war. And she interviewed about 100 of them, asked them sort of similar questions, and just wrote down their answers. So these are essentially original source information about who they were, where they came from, whose command they were under, and what their life was like. She also interviewed Mary E. Stearns, who was the wife of George Stearns, who was considered one of the architects to the 54th Regiment. And she sort of gets this behind the scenes look at what it was like to put together this group from a political standpoint. And it's a wife's perspective. So it's just a fascinating collection of information by this woman who herself was a literary icon. And one fun fact, she interviewed her stepfather, who fought in the Civil War. So it's, I'm always fascinated. Here's a Black woman collecting these Black men's stories and trying to document and honor through documenting their experiences, she's honoring their experience. So this is sort of what it looks like inside. And I just wanted to read one passage. This is taken from someone named E. George Biddle, and you can Google him because his son sort of participated, his great-grandson participated in reenactments of the Civil War. And so this is just a passage on his life. And so she says, he tells of some very interesting experiences of his during the various encounters. In one of his skirmishes, he tells of one of his company members that was praying on the field in the dark. The Confederate war firing by sound, and this man was praying so loud that Comrade Biddle crawled over and told him not to pray so loud, that he would get shot. But he prayed so loud that Comrade Biddle had to slide away from him and had not gone far when a shot stopped him from praying. So it's just so, every time I read this, it just is so haunting to me. And it is so fascinating to think about these young men that were caught up in this battle, who were really fighting for their life. And this is their story. And so it gets into some really amazing detail that's very personal. Also in our collection, we have an original Southern Horrors lynch law pamphlet. As I mentioned earlier, Ida B. Wells was a prolific investigative journalist who was documenting the injustice of all of these lynchings that were happening in the South. And she was basically putting it in these flyers and spreading it around. And so the League owns an original copy. This This pamphlet is online, but what is rare is the printed copy. So as far as we know, there are 4 of these that exist. New York Public Library has one, Howard University has one, and Carolina University Library has one, and the League has the 4th. And so this is the other huge marquee item that we own in our collection. And as I said earlier, Ida B. Wells' work inspired a lot of the work that was put out in the Women's Era newspaper. We also have several copies of the Women's Era newspapers also in our archive. And so Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin's daughter is Florida Ruffin Ridley, who was an educator and one of the first Black women, I believe, to work in Boston public schools, but she also lived in Brookline, and I believe there's a school actually named after her. But Florida was very much a part of that generation of Reconstruction era women who were just amazing and really movers and shakers of their time. And I wanted to highlight this as part of our collection because it really demonstrates what was going on in the League and how the women were using the League as a platform to enact change. So on the right is a letter that was written by David I. Walsh, who was the first Irish-American senator in Massachusetts, and this is in 1924. So it's his response to a letter that he received from Florida and the League. And so if you look in our archive, you see the letter, but behind the letter, there's actually a draft of what Florida had written, and that's the middle, the images in the middle. So it's her handwritten letter. So I imagine she typed it. But I wanted to read to you what she sent to David I. Walsh. And to set it up, essentially, David I. Walsh had voted to confirm a gentleman named William L. Cohen. And William L. Cohen is based in New Orleans, and he was one of the very few African-American Republican politicians to hold an office after Reconstruction because of all of all the rolling back of rights. But he was able to get this position as the comptroller in New Orleans, and David I. Walsh had voted to confirm him. And so here's the letter from Florida to David I. Walsh. So she says, "Today, as a nonpartisan organization of colored women, we want to give a word to you which will in some way express the deep gratification we feel that you should stand firm in your convictions, that you should honor the courage to defy party leadings and cast a vote for justice as you see it. In voting for Cohen, not only have you performed an act worthy of a son of Massachusetts, but in doing so, you have helped rebuke the short-sightedness, the bitterness, the cowardice of those who would deny opportunities because of race and color, those pitiful souls who feel the need of bulwarks to maintain their superiority. A party is fortunate in having such a man, and the only hope for the future of America lies in putting it into leadership men and women who refuse to be party slaves, who do not stifle the voice of conscious men and women, who can aim straight and have the courage to walk under great temptation. We are proud to claim you as a representative of the people." So I just think the power of her voice and the agency she used to get her point across, she didn't hold any punches, and she was very direct and clear. So this is key. In response, this is what David I. Walsh says. "While I take no special credit for voting for Mr. Cohen's confirmation, I was only doing my duty and what was just. It gratifies me to know that as many people in Massachusetts support my action. I would be lacking in true Americanism if I consciously discriminated against any man because of his color." And this is in 1924. And if you can imagine these two people of these two different walks of life having this exchange, it's almost like a blueprint for how to move forward in this multiracial democracy. And I'm just so intrigued by the interplay between her letter and David I. Walsh's response based on in 1924, when so many things were happening in the country that were very challenging, and what these women were doing. So here is also something from the archive. I could talk about Mariah Baldwin and what an incredible woman she was and all that she achieved. But in 1922, she was speaking at the Robert Gould Shaw House, and right after her speech, she had a massive heart attack and dropped dead. And so I can't imagine all of the challenges she was going through in the position that she was in, navigating these white spaces and also really helping to push civil rights forward. And so when she died, they had this commemorative program about her, and she was respected. She did so many things, but at the heart, she was an educator. She was so loved by that community in Cambridge that they created this pamphlet to really memorialize her. And this is one of my favorite things about the about the archive, because they really kind of talk about who she was. And so I'll just read this very quickly, but essentially what happens is it's an anecdote about how she kind of led. And the scene is she's coming out into a class that apparently is happening outside. But apparently she didn't realize this, but a bee had come and scared all the children away, and she walks right into the scene and she has some miscommunication. So the story says, the bee did not sting the boy, but flew away. The other children ran screaming into the building. In the confusion, Miss Baldwin received the impression that this boy was the cause of the disturbance and gave him a severe lecture, which the boy bravely listened to without a word of denial. After school, his teacher explained the circumstances to Miss Baldwin. She, much distressed at the apparent injustice, came into the room the next morning and apologized to that boy before the whole class for her mistake. She told him she admired him for the brave way in which he had borne her unjust criticism. From that day, Miss Baldwin and that boy were the best of friends, mutually respecting each other. I believe that nothing could persuade that boy to do anything after that to lose Miss Baldwin's good opinion of him. And that is such a sweet story to me, because it really shows not only her strength and leadership, but it just shows her humanity. And I just can't imagine being in a position that she was, to be able to be humble and to apologize and still command the type of respect that she was. Really a remarkable person. And this booklet is full of these wonderful stories about her. So another aspect of the league is just the women who were affiliated. So Lois Mailou Jones was was an incredible artist and educator. And if you don't know anything about Lois Mailou Jones, you should absolutely learn about her. She is from Boston, and she was formally trained at the SMFA. But she was involved with a youth group affiliated with the league. And so this is an image of them right in front of the building. She's right in the middle with that sign. And she went on to be just an incredible artist and educator. She actually taught at Howard for almost 50 years. She traveled the world, and she took this really formal training that she had. And then when she went to Howard, she met Alan Locke, who really encouraged her to dig into her African-American roots, or African diasporic roots. And she traveled to Haiti. She traveled all around Africa, and it really made her art even better. So not only is she known as an artist and an educator, but her career spanned almost 70 years, because she was able to sort of be re-inspired and change around some of her genres and styles. Just an incredible person. But she was a part of the league when she was a young woman. And I'm always intrigued because Meta Warwick was also an early member of the league, and Meta was one of her mentors. They did not meet at the League as far as I know, but it just shows you the caliber of women and their emphasis on art and culture and education that was happening in the space. So of course, we mentioned Coretta lived in the building while she was a student at NEC. And so this is just a copy of, a record of her time at the League and how much she paid. And very interestingly, we found that we actually have her wedding invitation. She must have sent it back to somebody in the building, and we still have it. And I also think this is very sweet because it has Obadiah's name on it. And it just shows just the nature of the relationship she had with the League, and the fact that we have something like this. This is very precious. And so this is just an image of Lewis Hayden. As I mentioned, we did a program with the Athenaeum about Harriet Hayden's album. But Lewis Hayden, if you're not aware, was sort of the linchpin of the Underground Railroad in Boston. He was an enslaved person in Kentucky and made his way to Boston, and was really the person who was running the whole program, the whole sort of movement of people through Boston into the North to escape slavery. And we have about 20 letters from Lewis Hayden to Lewis Hayden about a lot of the work, a lot of fundraising he was doing. In the League, we don't know how we got these documents, but we do have them. The picture on the left bottom, those are a picture of William and Ellen Craft, who were very famously escaped slavery. The woman disguised as a white man and her husband as her servant, coming from Georgia, going through Boston and escaping overseas. And Lewis Hayden was the person who aided the couple in Boston. And the League just happens to have these two original photos of these individuals, which is remarkable and fascinating. The other images are just images of some of the people that Lewis was communicating with. So we have a letter from C. Lennox Remond, who was a very famous abolitionist out of Salem, who was kind of the person who was big on the circuit before Frederick Douglass came into play. And then Frederick Douglass, with his own personal story, sort of took over. But we have a letter from Frederick Douglass as well. And fun fact about Lewis Hayden, he's one of the only people, him and his wife Harriet, the only couple were formerly enslaved to give their entire estate to an educational institution when they passed away, when Harriet passed away, which I think is remarkable because it really shows how much people valued education and knew how important it was. They gave that money to Harvard Medical School, and that endowed scholarship still exists to this day. This is also another fun, go back. This is also another fun aspect of the League. We have these huge photos of what I think are basically dioramas. And the dioramas all depict history of African-American people from when they were captured in Africa and brought to the United States to, as slaves, when they escaped, when they went to fight in the war, and then when they went on to be, successful business people and citizens. And they were taken by a gentleman named Addison Scurlock. And Addison Scurlock was a very famous Black photographer in Washington, D.C. A lot of the major cities had Black photographers who were like the one. And he was the person in Washington, D.C. He took some incredible, very famous photos of Du Bois, a very famous portrait shot. He also took photos of Marian Anderson. And so he apparently took photos of this diorama, and we have about 15 of these huge black and white images of these scenes that depict African-American history. And they're in the archive. We don't know how they got there or why they're there, but it's just a really fascinating, interesting look. And I had never conceived of people using something like a diorama to tell history. But they did. And this incredible photographer was the one who captured these images. And so this is just a quick look of the South End for a period had a tuberculosis issue. And back then they thought that you cured tuberculosis by cleaning your yard. So they would have these contests to clean your yard. And so every year they would have judges come and inspect the yard, and you would get a cash prize. So we have incredible, beautiful images of this whole process of them judging people's yards and seeing who won, and there'll be a little story in the paper. They had a lot of parades, and it was just a beautiful capture of life in the South End. And all of these have captions, so you can actually go and see exactly where they are. And this is just some examples of some of the other pieces we have. As I said, we have quite a huge collection of books. We have a lot of ephemera. We have this really cool bust of John Brown. It's a plaster bust. Tufts actually has the marble bust. This is also still very rare, even though it's not the original. We have actually quite a bit of John Brown paraphernalia in the building as well. Okay, and these are just some additional images that were taken in and around the building. They had an event to honor elderly folks at some point. I believe that's taken in the 1950s. You know, Dennis had mentioned that his mother often would take him to the leagues on Sundays, and so that was very common for afternoon tea. They had plays in the league, and on the right is just an image of the Boston chapter of the Alphas, who also had meetings on the league. This is from 1924, I believe. So on the horizon, we are working very hard, and we are an entirely volunteer board who are doing all of this work. We do it because of our passion for the league and to preserve and maintain ownership of the building and to really maintain that legacy. This year, we're working with a class from Northeastern, a service learning class. It's going to help us do some marketing around the organization. We're really continuing to focus and push fundraising and expanding program and building our infrastructure so that we can create a sustainable organization. We're looking to expand the board. We're also looking to restart a program called the Friends of the League, which includes people who are not necessarily on the board, but a way for people to support the organization. We're hoping that we can start the process of going after some national designations to help open up opportunities for funding for the organization. Eventually, the building will be what we're looking at, sort of a house museum, and also provide office space. But really, our goal is for it to be opened up to the community so that people can access the story of the league. So in closing, I know I've covered a lot of ground. I just want to thank Dennis and Naomi and Egypt and the entire team. And I think from a personal standpoint, I grew up in Boston, and I always think that sometimes you have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder because there's a very large Black community in Boston, but sometimes you feel a little invisible because you don't feel like your institutions or landmarks aren't central to the story of Boston. And I think the league proves otherwise. And I actually went to elementary school not too far from the West End, where a lot of these women grew up. And I often think, would my experience have been different had I really understood the story of the league and what these women did and what they achieved. And I think I work with a lot of faculty members, at Tufts, and they talk about you do get a charge from knowing that somebody has kind of walked in that space before you did. So I do think it's important to helping tell a more full story of belonging around the city. And I also say from another personal standpoint, I think the league represents so much of the hopes and the dreams of our mothers and our grandmothers. Many years ago, I had a conversation with my own grandmother about, her heroes, and she was telling me how much she loved her own mother. And she was telling me how much I would have loved her. And I was really fascinated because my grandmother was sort of the pinnacle. She was like an icon in our family. And I couldn't imagine her feeling that way about someone else. And I think it really had me thinking about our heroes, especially women. Who are their heroes? Who are the other women that set them up for success? And I think so much of that is really what the League represents: generations and generations of women who wanted the best for their children, and really sacrificed to make sure that they had a better life than they did. So I hope that you find some inspiration in the story of the League. I know I do. I hope you felt more informed and excited, and hopefully perhaps you'll be inspired to continue to support our organization in some capacity. We certainly do appreciate any support. So thank you again, and I'm happy to hear any questions that you might have.
Oh, thank you so much, Kalimah. The pictures, the images, your presentation was simply beautiful, very fascinating. I'm sure there's a lot of questions that the audience has for you. I do want to focus on a couple of questions that were in the chat. Mimi Pitchy is wondering, does the League have plans to digitize this amazing document collection, and do they have any preservation plans?
So yeah, a big part of our goal is to provide greater access. And so we're still in the process of sorting through our collection. The collection is massive, and you would be shocked if I told you this was scratching the surface. We removed about 50 boxes, bankers' boxes, filled with items and letters. So we're in the process of getting ourselves to the place where we can actually digitize a large portion, but that is definitely part of the goal.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I do believe there is another question. I do believe that Debbie Weiss was wondering, can the building be visited and the collections be viewed?
So the building is closed to the public right now just because it's under renovation. We're working with incredible architects, the Spencer Preservation Group, who are actively engaged in renovating the front and the back of the building so that it's watertight. So it is, and it's a construction site right now, but our goal eventually is to be able to open it as a house museum. Right now we do very, very small tours for a very targeted group of people for very specific reasons. I'm being very restrictive, very intentionally, just because it is under construction, and we do have a lot of concerns about people being in a space that's an active construction site. Did I answer both questions? Is that the question?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. I will encourage anyone, if they would like to. Oh, Miss Paula Paris. Yes, you have a question for
Hi, I
Kalimah.
do. I have a couple of questions. I have a comment, but thank you for answering one of the questions, which was when it was going to be open. But first, I just want to congratulate. I'm just breathless. Congratulations on this is such an incredible achievement, and an example of historic preservation that is really almost unprecedented. And I'm amazed that at the condition of the building as well as of its contents, that they are still there with everything that's, the construction, the renovations, the gentrification, that this is still there. And so that is really gives so much hope. I'm full. I remember my grandmother and her friends, they had some affiliation with 558. They didn't call it by the League, they called it 558. And then there was another organization, 464. That was mostly entertainment. What little bit I know about it, but they talked about them all the time, and they did things there. Tea was one of them. And I was in the building about 20 years ago with a little tour from Sarah Ann Shaw. So I know how passionate she was about reviving this organization and the building. So I just wanted to, if you could say who actually owns the deed, who holds the deed, and has this, what I'm trying to say, does this building have landmark? Have you gone after landmark designation from the city of Boston? And just if I can do a plug for from October 17th at Cambridge Public Library, was already mentioned about Pauline Hopkins. There's a character, I'm reading Contingent Forces, and there's a character in there that I believe is based on Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin. I'm pretty sure that that character is based on her. Now, spoilers if you haven't read it yet. But yeah, the deed and the landmark designation.
Yeah. So you're speaking to my heart. We have a signed copy of Contending Forces within our archive. So the riches keep going. But the league owns the deed and still owns the building. That is our goal, to retain ownership of it. And so that's a huge factor into why all of this exists, because they owned that space and could do what they wanted. And it just shows the power and the possibility once you own your space. So we're very excited about that. And then you mentioned, oh yes, we have local landmark status. So the South End has historical landmark status. So we have that, but our goal is to go for national landmark status so that we can open ourselves up to more opportunities. And one thing I don't think I made clear is that almost all of the archival material is out of the building. We went through a whole process, and it's now at Simmons University in their archive. So where it's safe, and there's an environmentally appropriate environment for those materials.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And I will encourage anyone, if they have a last question for Kalimah. I want to be respectful for everyone's time. We do keep the meetings a little bit, at an hour. So if you have one last question for Kalimah, you're welcome to unmute and go ahead and ask that question to Kalimah. I do see a lot of faces here today. Go ahead, Dr. Brown, do you have a question?
Yes, are the archives yet available at Simmons University?
They're available on a very limited basis. They will soon be available, but on a very limited basis, they are available.
Great. Thank you for that. Thank you again, Kalimah. This was a beautiful presentation. I'm so very proud of you. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. There's so many of you in the chat today, but we, the Lord Family Slave Legacy History Coalition, extend our appreciation for your constant, joining our meetings. Dr. Pearson, Cushion, Julia, Debbie, I can go on. So many of you here today, of course, Paula, Meta, I can go on. And if you are a first-time attendee at the Slave Legacy History Coalition, I encourage you to put your name and contact information in the chat so we can thank you for joining us today. Also, if you have any ideas of presentations, or if you would like to be a speaker or a presenter here at the coalition, feel free to drop your information too in the chat. We do have more information on our website, slavelegacyhistorycoalition.org. And I know that this was a lot of information. We do upload and record our meetings to our Slave Legacy History Coalition YouTube channel. So you can go back and view this if you want to recap Kalimah's presentation. Thank you again, everyone, for a wonderful meeting today, Kalimah. And would you like to?
I just wanted to say, I put our email in the chat, info@lwcs@Boston. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email us.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And if you have any questions for Kalimah, forward it to us. And I'll see about forwarding those questions to Kalimah when she has time to answer those questions for you whenever her time permits. But thank you again. It's so wonderful for seeing all of you here today. We look forward to our next meeting next month, second Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. to 11. And thank you again, Kalimah, and to all of you. And we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you very
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
Kalimah. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Kalimah.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Egypt. Bye, Dennis. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, Kalimah.